You've been practicing Stoicism for months. You just don't realize it yet.
That's a bold claim.
It's not a claim. It's a diagnosis. If you've read the quotes, listened to the episodes, and still feel like Stoicism is something you're learning, not something you're becoming, this episode is going to show you 5 signs the process is already working, whether you've noticed them or not.
Most men who've been doing this work assume they'd know if it was working. They'd feel different, they'd have arrived somewhere. So how do you know the process is working before you can see the results?
You look for the signs. And the first one is already behind you. There's a moment most men don't name. Something happens. A message comes in. A comment lands wrong. A plan falls apart. And before you respond, you wait. Not because you're unsure what to say, not because you're afraid, but because something in you has learned to hold the first reaction up to the light before letting it speak. You've been doing that. You just haven't been calling it anything.
I know exactly what that looks like. You're about to send a message, the kind you'd regret in an hour, and your hand just stops. You put the phone down, you come back to it 20 minutes later, and you write something completely different. And you never once thought of that as philosophy.
Epictetus wrote in the 5th chapter of the Enchiridion, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things." The event is not the problem. The opinion you form about the event, that is where the disturbance lives. And the pause, that moment before the message gets sent, that is the gap between the event and the opinion. The pause is not hesitation. The pause is the practice.
So it was already there. The philosophy was already operating in a moment I thought was just self-control.
There's a difference worth holding here between suppression and examination. Suppression is pushing the reaction down, keeping it out of sight. That is not Stoicism. That is pressure building without a valve. Examination is something else entirely. It is holding the reaction up and asking, is this opinion accurate? Is this disturbance earned? Does this event actually warrant what I'm about to do? Stoicism is not the absence of reaction. It is the refusal to be governed by one that hasn't been examined.
Questioning your first reaction, that's the gateway. But what happens when the reaction isn't doubt, it's pain?
Think about the last time something didn't go the way you planned. Not a minor inconvenience, something that actually cost you, a project that collapsed, a relationship that frayed, a decision that looked right until it didn't. Most men survive that. They get through it. They wait for the feeling to pass, and then they move on. But some men do something else. Quietly, almost without noticing, they take inventory, not of what went wrong, of what the thing taught them. If you've done that, even once, the process is already running.
I've done that. After a conversation that went completely sideways, one where I said the right things and still walked away feeling like I'd lost something, I didn't just replay it. I actually sat with it, asked myself what I'd missed, what I'd assumed that I shouldn't have. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't rumination either. It was more like taking the thing apart to see how it worked.
Marcus Aurelius wrote in the 4th book of the Meditations, "That which rules within, when it is according to nature, is so affected with respect to the events which happen, that it always easily adapts itself to that which is possible and is presented to it." The governing faculty, the part of you that reasons, that chooses, that responds. When it is operating as it should, it does not resist what is placed before it. It adapts, it metabolizes. The setback is not an interruption to the process. It is the material the process runs on.
That's different from staying positive. That's almost biological. Like the setback isn't the problem, it's the stimulus.
Exactly that. There's a distinction worth naming between endurance and extraction. Endurance is surviving the setback, keeping yourself intact until it passes. That is not nothing. Endurance has its own dignity, but it is not the same thing as what happens when Stoicism is working. When Stoicism is working, the man doesn't just survive the setback. He extracts from it. He leaves the experience carrying something he didn't have before, a sharper read on his own assumptions, a clearer sense of where his judgment failed, a piece of material he can actually use. Most men endure. The man in whom this process is running extracts.
Signs 1 and 2. Most people might notice those if they're paying attention. But sign 3, this is the one that happens in a room with no one watching. That's precisely why most men miss it entirely.
This one doesn't look like anything. That's why most men miss it. They're looking for a sign that resembles discipline, something visible, something that feels like effort. And this sign, sign 3, produces none of that on the surface. From the outside, it looks like a man who didn't argue when he could have, who didn't explain himself when the explanation was available, who didn't post when he had something to say. From the outside, silence. From the inside, the most demanding standard he has ever held himself to. Because the audience has shifted. It is no longer the room. It is no longer the feed. It is no longer the people whose opinion he once spent considerable energy managing. The audience is now the man he has decided to become.
But wait, isn't that just not caring what people think? Because that sounds like detachment. That sounds like someone who's checked out, not someone who's grown.
Those are not the same thing. Not caring what people think is adolescent. It is the posture of a man who has replaced one external standard, approval, with another, defiance. He is still oriented outward. He is still reacting to the room. He has simply inverted the reaction. Caring more about your character than your image is something else entirely. The orientation has changed. The man is no longer asking, "How do I appear?" He is asking, "Who am I?" when no one is watching. Seneca wrote this in the 25th letter. Do everything as if Epicurus were watching you. Notice what Seneca is doing there. He is not saying, do everything as if your colleagues are watching, as if your reputation is on the line, as if the room will judge you. He is saying, choose your witness carefully, and make that witness someone whose standard you cannot negotiate with, someone who will not accept a performance in place of the real thing. And in the same letter, you ought to make yourself of a different stamp from the multitude. Not better than the multitude, not above them. A different stamp, a different die, cast from a different standard entirely.
I think about a specific moment. There was a situation. Someone had the wrong read on something I'd done, and I had the words to correct it, the full explanation, ready to go. And I didn't use them. not because I was being strategic, not because I was taking the high road in any conscious sense, but because somewhere in that moment I understood. The explanation would have been for their comfort, not for my integrity. Those are two different things. That's actually the one I didn't see coming, because it doesn't look like discipline from the outside. It looks like silence.
Sign 3 is invisible. Sign 4. This one costs something. There's a moment most men quietly dread. Something went wrong, and the circumstances genuinely warrant blame. The other person was careless. The situation was unfair. The outcome was not what anyone would have chosen. And all of that may be entirely true. But at some point, you stopped distributing the blame. Not because the circumstances didn't deserve it, because you noticed that the distribution changed nothing. The account was still open, the situation still needed addressing, and the only lever within reach was yours. If you've made that turn, even once, sign 4 is already behind you.
I know that turn. There was an argument, one where I was right, objectively, demonstrably right, and I still sat with the question, what was my part in this? Not to punish myself, not to hand the other person an exit they hadn't earned, but because I knew that if I left my part unexamined, I'd carry it into the next conversation, and the one after that. That's not generosity, that's accounting.
Epictetus opens the Enchiridion, the very first chapter, with a division. Of things, some are in our power, and others are not. That is the entire architecture, 2 columns. What belongs to you, your judgment, your response, your chosen direction, and what does not, the outcome, the other person's behavior, the circumstances that arrived uninvited. Blame is the act of placing your energy in the column that does not belong to you. It is not irrational. The instinct is understandable, but it is expensive, because while your energy sits in that column, the column that is actually yours goes unattended. Ownership is the act of returning to the column that does.
That's not weakness. That's actually the harder position.
It is, because guilt and ownership are not the same thing, and most men conflate them. Guilt is backward-looking. It is the act of standing over what went wrong and punishing yourself for it. It produces feeling, sometimes intense feeling, but it produces no correction. The situation remains exactly as it was, only now there is suffering added to it. Ownership is forward-looking. It asks a different question entirely. Not, how bad was my part, but, what is the lever that is mine to pull, and when do I pull it? Stoic responsibility is not about feeling the weight of what happened. It is about identifying what moves next, and moving it.
All 4 signs so far, they happen in relation to something outside you. A reaction, a setback, a reputation, a conflict. There's always something else in the room. Sign 5 happens when there's nothing and no one else in the room.
No one is watching. The meeting is over. The conversation ended. The other person has left the room. There is no audience, no record, no one who would know the difference between what you did and what you could have gotten away with. And you held the standard anyway. That is sign 5. Not because someone might find out, not because the habit was strong enough to override the temptation, but because the standard itself had become the audience. The man who reaches this point has done something that most men spend their entire lives circling without ever arriving at. He has made his own judgment, his own reasoned assessment of what is worth doing. The final court of appeal. Not comfort, not approval, not the path of least resistance. His own standard.
But isn't that just willpower? Because willpower is finite. Everyone knows that. You can hold the line for a while, and then the tank empties.
Willpower is the act of overriding what you want in order to do what you think you should. It is a contest, and contests exhaust the contestant. What we are describing is not a contest. When the standard has become the audience, the man is no longer overriding anything. He is simply acting in accordance with what he has already decided he is. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in the 6th book that most translations struggle to capture. That the aim is not consensus with the crowd, but escaping the quiet madness of living by everyone else's measure. He is not describing rebellion. He is not describing superiority. He is describing orientation. The majority, and Marcus is not contemptuous of them, the majority are oriented outward, toward consensus, toward what the room will accept. The man who holds his standard when no one is watching has reoriented inward, toward what his own reasoned judgment will accept. That reorientation, once it happens, is not willpower. It is identity.
5 signs, and none of them are visible from the outside. No one sees the reaction you didn't give, the setback you extracted from, the explanation you withheld, the blame you didn't distribute, the standard you held in an empty room. But the man himself knows, and that's the whole point.
Which is precisely why the practices matter, because knowing the signs is not the same as building the capacity to hold them. 3 practices. Each one targets a different sign. Each one takes less than 15 minutes a day. That's where we go next. 3 practices. Not routines, not hacks. Practices, in the older sense of the word. Something you return to, not something you complete. Each one is tied to a specific sign. Each one takes less than 15 minutes, and none of them require anything other than a quiet moment and a willingness to be honest with yourself. The first practice is the evening audit. Seneca described his own version of this in the 83rd letter. He wrote, "I shall keep watching myself continually, and, a most useful habit, shall review each day." Not a journal, not a gratitude list, a single question asked at the end of the day. Where did I act from my standard, and where did I act from something else? No punishment, no performance, just the honest account. 2 columns, what held and what didn't. 5 minutes, last thing before the day closes.
That's sign 3 and sign 5 in one motion. The private standard made visible to yourself.
The second practice is the pause before response. This one targets sign 1 directly. Before you respond to the message, to the comment, to the person in front of you, you take 1 breath, not as a technique, as a question. Is what I'm about to say coming from my judgment or from my reaction? Marcus Aurelius wrote in the 8th book, "How much time he gains, who does not look to see what his neighbor says, or does or thinks." The pause is the gap between stimulus and response. That gap is where the governing faculty lives. 1 breath, and you are back inside your own column. 3 seconds, every time, without exception.
That one sounds simple, but in the moment, when the message lands wrong, when the tone is off, 3 seconds is a long time.
It is. That's precisely why it's a practice and not an instruction. The third practice is the obstacle inventory. This one targets sign 2. Once a week, not daily, you take the most significant setback of the past 7 days, and you ask it 3 questions. What did I assume that proved false? What do I now know that I didn't know before? What is the one adjustment that this setback makes available to me? Not a postmortem, not self-criticism, an extraction. You are mining the setback for the one thing it contains that you could not have acquired any other way. 10 minutes, once a week. Sunday evening works for most men.
5 signs, 3 practices, and none of it requires a retreat, a subscription, or a complete overhaul of your life. It requires a quiet room, 15 minutes, and the willingness to ask yourself an honest question. What strikes me, looking at all 5 signs together, is that Stoicism was never about becoming someone different. It was about becoming more precisely who you already are when you're at your best.
That is exactly it. Marcus Aurelius did not write the Meditations for publication. He wrote them for himself, in a tent, on campaign, at the end of days that had cost him considerably. He was not performing philosophy. He was practicing it, in the only place it can actually be practiced.
In the ordinary day.
Which of the 5 signs recognized you first, not because it was new, but because it already had a name? Drop the number below. The ones who don't answer are probably living sign 3 right now. If this episode gave you a framework, not just a feeling, there are 2 places to go deeper. The Stoic Philosophy Masterclass is 17 videos built around the same principles you heard today. And if you want the decision-making layer, how these signs translate into daily action, the Discipline playlist has 16. Both are in the description. Both were built for the man who came this far. In 2 weeks, we return. The topic is one most men would rather not examine, not because it's complex, because it's accurate. We'll be here,